My two distinguished colleagues, Shri Piyush Goyal and Shri Shiv Prakash Shuklaji, Dr. Hasmukh Adia, the Finance Secretary, the Chairperson of the CBIC, Shri Ramesh, Member GST, Shri Mahendra Singh, Secretaries, Government of India, who are present here today, the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Arvind Subramaniam, two former chairpersons of the CBIC, who in the last 3 years had a very key role, Shri Najib Shah and Srimati Vanjana Sarna, other distinguished officers, heads of various chambers, ladies and gentlemen. Today marks the first anniversary of a monumental economic reform which was carried on in this country, the imposition of the goods and services tax. The need for its imposition was very obvious because prior to the 1st of July last year, we unquestionably had one of the most complicated, if not one of the most clumsy, indirect tax systems in the country. Anyone doing business had to face 17 indirect taxes and multiple cesses. He had to file multiple returns, have an interface with multiple authorities, had to suffer the cascading effect of tax on tax, which added to inflationary pressures on the economy. Each territorial jurisdiction of a state required a separate rate and a separate return. There was no free flow of goods or services across the country. Though an independent nation, politically sovereign and one, India had fragmented markets. And therefore, it was absolutely necessary that India switches over to a more efficient system, a system which doesn't involve these complications, and in fact persuades people on the ease of doing business to pay their taxes. My own experience since the economic reform started in India in 1991 has been that no reform of this magnitude is ever possible till the head of the government, the Prime Minister, stands strongly behind that reform. In the case of the GST, we had an unequivocal support of the Prime Minister, and therefore we could proceed further and enter into arrangements with the various states to go ahead with this. My second experience has been that whenever a major reform of this magnitude is to be implemented, there will be many in the system who will advise you either not to go ahead with the reform or to postpone its implementation. They will start highlighting the dangerous consequences of implementation. And once you waver, then reforms become extremely difficult. We faced this experience in the case of GST also. And therefore, we disregarded the advice of those who wanted either a deferment or an indefinite postponement. We analyzed the reasons why governments in the past had failed to implement this reform. They were committed to the GST, but they could never create a comfort level with the state governments that, keeping in mind the federal character of India, the concerns of the states would be respected. Let me give you two illustrations. The states were told earlier that you abolish the GST and the center would compensate you for this with the GST compensation. The states acted accordingly, but the center never provided them the GST compensation. When I took over in May 2014, the states categorically told me that till the central government agrees to provide us with the GST compensation, it's difficult for the states to trust the word of the central government. And therefore, liabilities incurred in the past were discharged by us to the satisfaction of the states. The second reason was that the states were obviously scared or apprehensive of the fear of the unknown. What if my revenue falls? How am I to be compensated? If the government had no response to this, the states, particularly the manufacturing states, were unwilling to join in. And therefore, we realized the genuine concern of the states and put it as a part of the Constitution amendment that for the first 5 years, the states would be guaranteed from the GST collections a 14% annual growth of their taxes. This put the states at a high comfort level. Having conceded these two major points to the states, we got something back from the states. The amendment to the Constitution proposed by the earlier governments had permanently kept petroleum products out of the GST. We persuaded the states to bring petroleum products within the GST, but assured them that the tax would be levied only once the GST Council agrees. And therefore, in the matter of petroleum products, we moved one step ahead. We consistently kept in mind the federal principles on which the delicate balance of governance in India rests. And therefore, the structure of the GST Council was accordingly developed. This structure enabled us to pass the Constitution amendment by a unanimous vote, to pass all the supporting legislations by unanimity, to pass all the rules by a consensus, and finally, to fix all rates through a consensus and unanimity of the GST Council. We've had 27 meetings of the Council so far. And I think it has become a role model for governance in various areas. It is India's first federal decision-making body, where the center and the states sit together and are able to decide. And I have personally ensured in each of these 27 meetings that I presided that all decision-making is through a consensus, and we've not had to use the voting arrangement provided for the Council even on a single occasion. Whenever conflicting views are there, we form a group of ministers of the state governments, ask them to hammer out a consensus, and till such time a consensus is worked out, one way or the other, we keep on discussing the issues and finally come to a conclusion whether the proposal has to go through or the proposal need not. What are the obvious advantages we've had at the end of 1 year? I spoke about the tax simplification. You have one return. You only address your software. You'll probably get your assessment orders back on your software. All the checkposts are gone. the whole of the country has become one unified market. The cascading effect is gone. What is the much defamed 28% tax structure? In fact, in the original taxation, pre-GST, was 31 to 32% because of the cascading effect. And therefore, we brought it down to 28 and now have been busy in the process of shifting a large number of items from 28% to lower slabs. The weighted average of the total taxation basket has significantly come down. And therefore, we are in the process of rationalizing the rates itself. What is the impact without raising rates? In fact, by lowering rates, the revenue impact of that. And I think this is the most significant impact of the GST which has taken place. Last year, despite challenges to the global economy, thanks to demonetization, the anti-black money measures, the GST, but the GST impact was not fully visible last year. We had a direct tax increase of 18%. You had a number of people in the personal income tax being added as assessees. But the first quarter of this year shows that the advance tax payments indicates that the personal income tax collection, the gross figure has increased by 44% and corporate tax by 17%. So the GST not only impacts the indirect taxation, but those who have to disclose their turnover now for the purposes of GST have necessarily to pay their direct taxes also. So this net significant increase in the direct tax is substantially attributable this year to the effective enforcement of the goods and services tax. On the GST, if we look at the total tax structure, the CGST, the SGST, the IGST and the compensation cess, a study of the first 9 months from July 2017 to 31st March 2018 shows that the combined total collection has been 8.2 lakh crores. If this figure is annualized, it comes to about 11 lakh crores for the full year. What does it indicate? A 11.9% increase of the same tax collected when there were differential taxes in the previous year by the central and the state governments. So in the very first year, where you had a lot of teething problem, where you were trying to persuade a lot of people to join in, itself has seen, despite lowering of the taxes, a 11.9%, which is a tax buoyancy of 1.22%, which was erstwhile unknown to the indirect tax systems in India. So the total tax base itself, the number of people who got themselves registered, itself has increased significantly. Now, these are the remarkable changes which are taking place on account of the implementation of the GST. So you will have a system where the taxations will eventually go down. My colleague Shri Piyush Goyal just now mentioned, as the tax collection goes up, the capacity to rationalize the slabs, the capacity to rationalize the rates also will certainly increase. And therefore, that capacity to rationalize will increase once the total volume of tax collected significantly increases. And once you have a more efficient tax, that more efficient tax itself will ensure that evasion doesn't take place. The input tax credit itself is an effective route for ensuring that people make their disclosures more honestly. The e-way bill has already been implemented. And once the invoice matching comes in, evasion and detection of that evasion itself will become far simpler itself. And therefore, I have not the least doubt in my mind that the total basket of taxes, and in case India is to evolve into a developed country, from almost a stagnant tax GDP ratio, the last 4 years have shown a 1.5% increase. My personal desire would be that over the next 5 years, in the non-oil tax category, through the GST and the direct taxes, we make a further increase of 1.5% by adding the non-filers and the evaders into the taxation category. There's still a lot of scope for that improvement. And if that happens, rationalizing structures itself will be possible. A single slab, as Mr. Piyush Goyal mentioned, in a society where there is a large population below the poverty line is not possible. I was in Singapore last year, and the government asked me, why do you have multiple slabs? I said, you are a city-state. You tax food at 7%. You tax a luxury car also at 7%. We can't afford to tax food. So most of our food items are zero. Our Aam Aadmi products are at 5%. And therefore, we have to keep the vulnerable out of the tax liability. A direct tax always is a progressive tax. The rich pay more and the poor are exempted. But an indirect tax is a regressive tax. The rate is the same for rich and the poor. But in the selection of commodities which are to be non-taxed or less taxed, we can use our discretion to make sure that there is equity as far as the whole system is concerned. I have seen experience of countries all over the world where GST caused a major disruption. It's considered to be a disruptive reform. I myself used to use the word disruptive when it came to a major reform like GST because it would take time to settle down. But after the 1 year of experience, I am not so sure whether I can use the word disruptive for the GST reform. The smooth manner in which the changeover has taken place is almost unprecedented anywhere in the world. And for this, I think I owe my personal gratitude to all the officers of the central and the state governments, to all the officers of the CBIC, the corresponding officers of the state government, Dr. Hasmukh Hadia, who along with his team worked round the clock, Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, who was always there with his calculations to advise us as to what to do and what not to do. And that enabled us, with the participation of each one of you, to ensure that this effective reform is implemented and the grievance redressal mechanism is effectively utilized. I'd be failing in my duty if I did not express my gratitude to the key institution which has enabled this. That is the GST Council. It's a unique experiment, I said. The only experience of India of having a federal institution to work, finance ministers of all states, finance ministers of the center, all collectively meeting for days and days together and then hammering out a consensus. And we were able to bring about a consensus on each one of these. They were very effectively assisted by their corresponding officers. And therefore, I would personally like to thank each and every finance minister of India, of the states, who played a very vital role in rewriting the taxation history as far as India is concerned. Their contribution to this effort has been invaluable and will always be be recognized. I'm sure we've seen the first year where we've seen effective gains. This is only the short term or at best a medium term impact of the GST. The longer medium term and the long term impact of the GST and on India's growing GDP and growth, on the ease of doing business in India, on the expansion of business and trade in India, and of making India an honest trading and business center is going to be significant. I am confident that the best in the GST in terms of its contribution to the society is yet to come. Thank you very much for having invited me for this event.
Thank you, sir.